We all start here, a mini full of promise. And then we do this to it. A cleansing flood from the can of chaos. Look at 'em, lost in the tide. Detail? What's that? Splotch by splotch, we paint regret in advance. It doesn't have to be this way. I've been quietly crafting whispers about Airbrush Unchained, laying the groundwork for something solid, something that could shine. Today, we set the first stone. No more teasing. This is Airbrush Unchained. When it comes to priming minis, there's an alternate path to using rattle cans, one that atomizes, not muddles, where detail isn't sacrificed for speed, and your model enters the world not as a blob, but as a being. Today, we test 4 primers. 2 primers that are water-based and 2 that have more bite. We'll thin them, spray them, scratch them, strip them. No loyalty, no mercy. Because primer isn't just a base coat, it's the foundation that every other layer depends on. Airbrush Unchained. The first primer we're going to look at is Vallejo Surface Primer. This is probably one of the most widely available and highly recommended primers out there. It's an acrylic polyurethane water-based primer, making it forgiving, low odor, and easy to clean. For each primer, I wanted to start out by showing you how it performs straight out of the bottle, which is like I refer to as either undiluted or neat. And this will kind of give us a reference on how it does in the abrasion and chemical tests to see how the reducers impact the adhesion and bonding. The Vallejo primer is pretty runny out of the bottle, and you can honestly shoot it out of an airbrush and probably put it onto miniature without much issue, provided you're using the right needle size and PSI. Once the spoon's cured for over 12 hours, I began testing how well paints adhered to it, which is probably one of the most important things in a primer. I sprayed a full set of spoons with different white paints. The first set of durability tests I'm going to conduct is abrasive tests, where I use a fingernail, toothpick, coin, and other items to try to abrade the surface of the primer. I'm also interested to see how the primer handles sanding, so I'm going to use a low grit dry sandpaper and a high grit wet sandpaper to see how it handles that abrasive action. The Vallejo primer did pretty good against most implements, but against sandpaper it didn't do very well. Between the 2 main sets of durability tests we're going to do, I'm also going to do a quick unmasking with masking tape to see if we get any lifting of the paints. The second set of durability tests is going to be me using chemicals to see if I can strip paint from the spoon. From left to right, I start with water, then I go to 99% IPA, then white spirits or odorless white spirits used in oil painting, and finally lacquer thinner, which is a group of chemicals that makes probably one of the most aggressive thinners that you can get in a hardware store, and it's likely going to strip the paint from all the spoons. The first Vallejo mix is going to be 2 parts Vallejo primer to 1 part Vallejo reducer. The Vallejo reducer consists of a 4:1 ratio of airbrush thinner to airbrush flow improver. So that's 80% thinner to 20% flow improver. Coming out of the airbrush, I can already tell that reducing this Vallejo primer makes it spray much smoother. Generally speaking, when you reduce paint, it tends to weaken the adhesion and bonding. However, this Vallejo reducer seems to have strengthened it. I don't know, it's kind of an odd finding and it doesn't really stack up with the results. Some of the unmasking on the Vallejo primer, whether it was reduced or neat, produced a little bit of a lifting effect in very small areas. So something to keep in mind. During the chemical tests, it did pretty average, where water only impacted the acrylic paints and the alcohol and lacquer thinner stripped it quite easily. Let's see how this Vallejo primer goes down on a mini and see what the results look like. You'll notice in this video that I exclusively use black primer. This is because I like to use it as a base for my underpainting, which will be shown further along the series. That said, you can get primers in a variety of shades from black to white and colors as well. If you plan to use contrast or speed paints, I highly recommend priming in a light gray to even white. The second Vallejo mix is 3 parts Vallejo Primer and 2 parts Createx Reducer. The Createx Reducer is comprised of 50% 4011 and 50% 4021. This mix was a joy to spray, and the 4021 has really good self-leveling properties, which when added to the paint gives really good looking results. While the results look great, you can tell that this Createx Reducer has weakened the adhesion and bonding in the paint, evident here in the abrasion testing. Again, it seems the sandpaper causes some pretty bad tearing in this paint. As for unmasking and the chemical testing, this mix did pretty average, not providing any kind of benefit or weakening it to any great degree. One takeaway I've gained from these chemical tests is that the white acrylic paint did not really do a good job of adhering or bonding. It's probably because I reduced it quite a bit. When it comes to spraying minis, this mix really shines just because it does a really good job at self-leveling and providing the most details that you can get with this primer. I'm kind of new to these Createx reducers, so I still have a lot of experimenting to do before I nail down a ratio that I'm really happy with, but this one seems to be adequate. An additional benefit of using these Createx reducers is that they're really designed to reduce tip dry, and I've definitely noticed that in use. Okay, let's take a look at the results and see how the mix is compared to the undiluted version. Visually, they all look pretty much the same. It'd be really hard to determine a difference in the finish. As I pointed out earlier, it seems that the Vallejo reducer actually kind of strengthened the bonding and helped with the sanding and the tearing issue. And the primer on the minis looks really good. There doesn't seem to be any clogging of the details. The second water-based acrylic polyurethane primer is Stynylrez Easy App Surface Primer. Straight out of the bottle, this primer sprayed really well, and honestly you probably wouldn't need to dilute it while applying it to minis. I've begun testing white paints for zenithal priming by using 3 different types of white paints for these priming tests. The first is Army Painter Fanatics White, which was heavily reduced to get it to spray well. The second is Aqueous White Surfacer with alcohol and water added. The third is Mr. Finishing Surfacer with Mr. Color Leveling Thinner added. Minis that are primed in black are typically zenithal primed or highlighted later on. And so I wanted to use both black and white, which is going to give me good contrast and appearance, but also help me understand how the paints interact. The Stynylrez Primer didn't do a very good job against the abrasion implements, but it did do a good job against the sandpaper. You can see that there's way less tearing compared to Vallejo. If you're looking for the best water-based primer for sanding, undiluted Stynylrez has got to be the best. As for unmasking in the chemical test, this paint seemed to do pretty average. Although I would say it does have a leg up on the Vallejo when it comes to using just water. Performing these chemical tests is vital for primers because we want to make sure that the very first layer isn't going to be affected by chemicals in sequential layers. The first Stynylrez mix is going to be a 1 part Stynylrez primer to 1 part Vallejo reducer. Again, the Vallejo reducer is 4 parts airbrush thinner and 1 part airbrush flow improver. There's not a lot of technique that goes into priming with an airbrush, but I always start with an initial tack coat, which is a very light coat, which provides a textured surface for when you go to apply the majority of the primer. This Stynylrez Vallejo mix is a clear case on how reducers can definitely weaken a primer. You can see that throughout the whole abrasion testing that it was significantly weaker than the undiluted version. In the chemical testing of this mix, the acrylic side of the spoon didn't do very good at all. The water and white spirits seemed to disrupt it quite a bit, but with the alcohol and lacquer-based paints, it did pretty good. Because the Stynylrez primer would probably do great undiluted, it definitely goes down on a mini really well once you reduce it. You get a nice very thin layer and no clogged details. Throughout the video, you'll see me use a variety of different airbrushes. When it comes to priming, the important thing is using the correct size needle. Generally, you'll want to use a 0.3mm to a 0.5mm needle. You'll also want to set the air to about 20 psi. The second Stynylrez mix is 2 parts Stynylrez Primer to 1 part Createx Reducer. Again, the Createx Reducer is 50% 4011 and 50% 4021. This mix laid down really smoothly. You can see even in my initial tack coat that I get a really fine, even coat. To me, the finish seems a bit more matte than Vallejo. Similar to the Stynylrez mix with the Vallejo reducer, this Createx reducer also weakened this primer. There was nothing unusual to note in the unmasking and the chemical testing. I'm hoping that we'll see more varied results when we get to the more aggressive solvent primers. Spraying this Stynylrez mix onto the Mini was an easy process. Stynylrez Primer is actually made by an airbrush company, so it makes sense that it works really good in an airbrush. Unfortunately, when I ordered my set of Stynylrez primers, the first batch came with major issues. The gray looked like it was a cookies and cream milkshake, for example. So I had to order a second one, and that one came in much better condition. When we look at the results, we can see that the undiluted version of the Stynylrez Primer is probably the best when it comes to abrasion and chemical testing. The results also clearly show that Stynylrez is probably the best water-based primer for sanding. Additionally, reducing this primer weakens it considerably. You can see that in both the abrasion and chemical results. Concerning to me is the fact that you can actually scrape or remove the paint with just your fingernail. Time to finally look at some primers with more aggressive solvents. The first is Mr. Hobby Aqueous Surfacer. This is a unique primer because it uses alcohol as a primary solvent. The idea behind using alcohol as a solvent is that it tends to act a little bit more like lacquer-based paints, but it's not as harmful to use or inhale. This primer is very viscous straight out of the bottle, and even with a 0.45mm needle, it was kind of having issues and struggling getting a nice coat down. You can see that it's created somewhat of an orange peel texture. This texturing provides a pretty good surface for the white paint to attach to it, and I didn't have any issues applying the white paint. Okay, now we're finally seeing some results. You can tell that this primer is much more durable than the water-based primers, whereas the implements that I use on all of the water-based primers didn't really abrade the surface of the paint. I had to get my metal scraping tool out to see how far I had to go in order to scrape the surface. There were a few instances while unmasking this primer where I got a bit of lifting, and you'll see a larger chunk later. But you can see that this primer handles chemicals much better than the water-based primers, where alcohol and lacquer thinner had a much more difficult job eating through it and stripping the paint. The first mix with Aqueous Surfacer is actually something that people highly recommended online, and that was thinning it with Mr. Hobby Leveling Thinner. This is a lacquer-based thinner which is going to make the paint a bit more harmful to use, so keep that in mind. It turns out that people online were right. This mix goes down really smoothly, the initial tack layer was beautiful, and applying the rest of the primer was great. Even thinned down, the Aqueous Surfacer does a really good job against abrasive implements. I still had to get the metal scraper out in order to scrape the surface. But you can tell that with a thinner layer from reduction that the sandpaper has gone a bit further. This unmasking went okay. While this mix handled abrasive implements pretty well, the chemicals had a much bigger impact on it compared to the undiluted version, most likely a result of it having a thinner layer. I really enjoyed spraying this mix onto the Mini because while it dries quickly, it doesn't dry too fast. That way you can get nice, even, but thick coats down. While the Aqueous Surfacer is alcohol-based, the Mr. Hobby Leveling Thinner is lacquer thinner-based. That makes this mix much more harmful if inhaled, so you want to make sure that you're wearing proper PPE, as in a respirator, and that the room is properly ventilated so that you're not contaminating other areas of your home. The second Aqueous Surfacer mix is a 1 part Aqueous Surfacer to a 1 part IPA plus water reducer. That's generally about 60% IPA and 40% water, or a 3:2 ratio. By using just IPA and water, there hasn't been any flow improver added or a self-leveling agent added, so it dries pretty fast, almost as quickly as I can spray it. Through the abrasion testing, we can tell that this mix is a bit stronger than the previous mix with the leveling thinner. This particular unmasking test went well, but you can see in the chemical testing that that spoon had some pretty bad lifting on the left side of the spoon. The chemical testing was a bit better than average. While spraying this Aqueous mix with IPA and water, I moved the airbrush closer to the Mini, that way I could get the paint on the Mini quicker so that it wouldn't dry as fast. When primers dry too quickly, you end up kind of with an uneven finish because it hasn't had a chance to level out while it's all wet. You can also be a little bit more heavy-handed on the trigger to get more paint onto the Mini faster. Observing the results for the Aqueous surfacer, we can see that the undiluted spoons provide the best durability, which is unfortunate because the orange peel texture and the way it sprays out of the brush means that you're definitely going to want to reduce it. You can tell a clear difference in the finish by looking at these results. Between the two mixes that we tested, it does appear that the IPA plus water reducer is a tad stronger in the abrasion testing. It also seems that it held up through the chemical testing a little bit better. The last primer we're going to look at in this video is Mr. Hobby Mr. Finishing Surfacer. This is a lacquer-based primer which seems to be getting a lot of hype online from miniature painters. Similar to the Aqueous surfacer, this stuff is quite viscous in the bottle, and spraying it undiluted had some issues. You can see that it's left an orange peel texture similar to the Aqueous surfacer. Part of the reason why this surfacer is hyped so much online is due to the fact that it's lacquer-based, which means that it sprays out of the airbrush beautifully. You don't have any issues like clogging, tip dry, and stuff like that that you'd normally get with an acrylic polyurethane blend. That being said, this stuff is extremely toxic when inhaled. You'll definitely need to be wearing a respirator and have good ventilation in your room. Similar to the Aqueous primer, this stuff is extremely durable, and it required me to get the scraper tool in order to abrade the surface. The sanding results were pretty impressive as well. There were no issues in the unmasking of any of the Mr. Finishing Surfacer spoons. We can see here in the chemical testing that this surfacer is the most resistant to chemicals, making it pull ahead of the Aqueous surfacer. It's crazy how resistant it is to chemicals. The first mix with the Mr. Finishing Surfer is one that I've used quite a bit over the last year, spraying hundreds of minis with it, and that's a 1-to-1 mix with the Mr. Hobby leveling thinner. Out of the airbrush, this mix sprays beautifully, and there's a reason why so many people recommend this ratio. The leveling thinner has a retarder in it, allowing the paint time to settle before it dries. Did great in the abrasion testing where the metal scraper and sandpaper were the only things to disrupt the surface. Though it does seem a tad weaker than the undiluted version, but plenty durable for tabletop minis. After a clean unmasking, we can see in the chemical test that most chemicals won't eat through this surfacer, including alcohol. These findings are important to me personally because I'm trying to figure out which paints would work best as zenithal highlight. Having sprayed hundreds of minis with this mix, I can tell you that it goes down amazing onto the mini. There's really no issues spraying this primer. Like I said, you will not get tip dry or clogging because the solvent is so hot and will literally strip the paint off the needle as it's flowing through the airbrush. Another concern with these lacquer-based primers is that you will need some additional cleaning supplies in order to clean your airbrush. I developed a method to safely and efficiently clean your airbrush after using these products. Go check out that video. And the final mix for the video is going to be 1 part Mr. Finishing Surfacer and 2 parts lacquer thinner. The Mr. Hobby leveling thinner can be hard to come by online, and sometimes it can be quite expensive. So for this mix, I used some lacquer thinner that you can get at a hardware store to see if we can get this primer to spray with easy to source thinners. Similar to the homemade mix for the Aqueous surfacer, this stuff dries really fast. This mix also performs similarly to the Aqueous homebrew mix in abrasion testing. This mix did fine through the unmasking, and we can see based on the chemical testing that it did pretty average compared to the other mix. If you look closely, you can see that some of the white paint was lifted on the left side of the spoon, but that's not because of the primer failing. That's just poor adhesion on the white paint. Spraying this mix onto the mini was pretty easy due to how much has been reduced. With a lot more lacquer thinner in the mix, I'm able to keep the paint pretty wet as as I apply it to the Mini. The results look really good, and you can still see some of the voxel lines or print lines within the Mini's dress. I believe you can use something like propylene glycol as a retarder or leveling agent. I have some laying around from another project, so I plan to tinker with this mix to get it to act more like the Mr. Hobby leveling thinner. When we look at the results for this primer, you can see why it gets a lot of hype online. The finish looks amazing, it's very durable in the abrasion testing, and aside from lacquer thinner, most chemicals have a hard time stripping it from the spoons. In an ideal setting where you have proper PPE and ventilation, this is going to be one of the best choices as far as primers go. One thing I found is the Mr. Finishing Surfacer appears a bit more matte compared to the Aqueous surfacer. Now it's time to aggregate the results and draw some conclusions. When we look at the two water-based primers, we can see that their final appearance looks pretty similar, so you're not going to see a huge difference there. However, when we get to the abrasion testing, you can see a clear difference between these two brands. Vallejo does much better against abrasive implements like the fingernail, toothpick, and coin, whereas Stynylrez does better against both types of sandpaper. Neither is super resistant to chemicals, and that's probably something that will drive my decision moving forward. In my opinion, the best results for Vallejo was mix number 1, which was mixing it with the Vallejo reducer. As far as Stynylrez goes, I think that spraying this out of the bottle is probably your best bet. You get a really nice finish, and it's much more durable than if you were to reduce it. When we examine the more aggressive solvent-based primers, we can see a few key differences. The first big difference is in appearance. You can see that the Aqueous appears a bit more glossy compared to the Mr. Finishing Surfacer, which appears a bit more matte. Although subtle, I do believe that the Mr. Finishing Surfacer has a slight edge over the Aqueous Surfacer when it comes to abrasion testing. And I say that based on looking at the finer sandpaper and how that behaved, because aside from that, they both look pretty much the same. I would also say that the same is true when it comes to chemical testing, where the Mr. Finishing Surfacer has a slight edge over the Aqueous Surfacer. If all the health hazard concerns have been properly addressed, I believe that the Mr. Finishing Surfacer is the best primer purely based on performance. But if you're looking for something that's a step above the water-based primers but isn't as nearly as harmful to your health, I think the Aqueous Surfacer is a great choice. Both of these surfacers will need to be reduced in order to get an acceptable surface. The easiest to use mix that gets the best results is going to be using both of these products with the Mr. Hobby Leveling Thinner. However, if you want marginal durability gains, you can try the homebrew mixes that I showcased. If you've got your own primer ritual or favorite formulas, feel free to share them below. What works for one of us might unlock something new for someone else. Should you choose the path of an alcohol or lacquer-based primer, I recently posted a video on how to properly clean your airbrush after using said products. Remember that groundwork I was talking about at the beginning? Links to everything in this video are down below. Using them costs you nothing, but supports future and independent experiments like this. And if you're in the market for an airbrush, I've already made a buyer's guide to help you find one that fits your flow. And the next video in this series is going to be all about zenithal highlighting and which products work best for that process. So stay tuned. Airbrush Unchained. Whether you know me as Enzo Greymane, the Wily Wizard, or Night Owl Forge, you can always count on me to test the claims and limits of products before promoting them. Until next time, keep priming, keep atomizing, and stay inspired.